stream. So we are live streaming this event this evening, and it will be posted on our site for at least a few days, maybe a week, and maybe longer. So we will also be taking questions. For those of you who are joining us online, you can enter those questions into the chat, and I will be receiving those. So I also want to point out that there's a couple of handouts on the back table as you leave, or as you enter, you might have grabbed those. So if you're interested, please feel free to take these. One is just about the film, and on the back of this is 10 things you can do to prevent gun violence, and the other one is gun violence statistics. I'm guessing these are a little bit dated, but they at least provide some information and some citations for references. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start the film. And again, thank you very much for coming this evening.
I can remember going to work. It was a Wednesday, and we have our staff meetings at 10 o'clock. I took the call, and he said, "So have you seen about the shooting?" And I said, "Yes." The next question is, "How soon can you get there?" I can remember driving out to her funeral, which was in this Catholic church sort of out on the edge of a new suburb. You know, just standing there watching as the hearse parks under the 9/11 flag with the 2 fire trucks holding it, and the priest leading the procession, the whole family, and the whole procession out to the back of the hearse. You know, when someone dies and they're 93, there's a sense of peace about that. But when you watch a little girl's coffin come out of a hearse, there's no peace. And then I remember turning and realizing that there were thousands of people on the street, and you literally could have heard a pin drop. And you realize that gun violence just rips through anything that makes sense in our lives.
We had it all planned out. You know, she sent me an email in February. It was like we just finished Valentine's, which every little thing was a big deal to Brichelle. And she sent me an email, and it said, didn't say much, but it was a reservation for a restaurant that she wanted to take me to for dinner. And I'm thinking, we're in February, and she's already made reservations for Mother's Day. And by the time Mother's Day had come, Brichelle was gone. She was killed in March, so Mother's Day is in May, so I never got my Mother's Day dinner with my daughter. And so many other things that I won't get with my daughter. And it's like, just in the blink of an eye, it's gone. Everything she's worked for, everything I've worked for, all the plans, and, you know, just gone.
I remember thinking for a split second of making a run to the window on the other side of the classroom, but the windows were kind of weird windows and didn't really open a normal way, and it would have been hard to get out. I was a fourth-year college student and started a class on the Monday after the weekend away, and talked to another girl who was in my class as well and told her I'd come pick her up. By the time we got to the parking lot that morning, class had already started. And so we kind of looked at each other and said, you know what, class has already began, you know, should we go get breakfast instead? Let's not go today. And we said, you know what, we should go. About halfway through our class, another girl came in even later than us. And this girl, Rachel, was probably one of the best students in the class. And the fact that You know, she came in halfway through. It was kind of strange. And that's when she turned back to us and said, there was a shooting in my dormitory this morning, and they had the whole building on lockdown. And they wouldn't let us leave. And I kept telling them I had class to get to, and they wouldn't let me go. Until finally they said I can go, and here I am. I don't know, a few minutes after that, we first heard a loud bang, bang, bang from somewhere outside of our classroom. And then a few seconds after that, it was a much louder, like a bang, 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 and this, you could tell, was something in our building. This was not something outside, something, you know, down the hallway. And teacher stopped class again. She looked much more concerned at this point. I remember seeing her face expression drop. That's when she went to the doorway to look into the hallway to see what was making the noise. And as soon as she opened it, she slammed the door shut and she said, everybody get underneath your desk, and somebody called 911. Bullets started coming through our wooden door in the front of our classroom. I saw somebody looking like they were about to walk out of the room. This person turned the desk and started to come down the row. And I saw a white shirt with 2 holsters over each shoulder and ammunition clips on the holster. I felt the first bullet come above my knee, and I smelt the propellant, the gunpowder from the gun, and it smelled to me like fireworks. And all those feelings kind of came together, and at that moment I realized, like, I just got shot, like, this is real. As he came in a second time, I was shot in my hip. You know, I could hear him walking around the room just from the constant sound of gunfire. And then the clip would change. People were screaming in the beginning, but as it went further on, it got quieter, and he never said anything. He came back a third time and came down the row. I was shot across my chest and went right underneath my armpit and came out, and which flipped my entire body around to the other side and exposed my right side. And I was shot a 4th time in my right hip. I realized that the last bullet that I heard, the last gunshot that I heard, was the one he gave to himself in his head and killed himself in the front of my classroom. As they were dragging me outside of the room, I had, you know, backwards, I had one last view of the room, and I saw all these people just lying on the floor that weren't moving. Everyone who was shot at Virginia Tech was shot multiple times. And some of the people who were found in the front of the classroom were shot upwards of 10 times. And my friend Rachel, who came in late, never even made it out of a chair. There were 17 people in that room that day. I'm one of 7 people who are still alive. You know, in my mind, that whole experience lasted hours, but I learned after the fact it was about 9.5 minutes. Some people say I'm here because, you know, God was looking out for me that day, and I appreciate the kind words, but I mean, I would only hope that God was looking out for everybody that day. I mean, there were some wonderful people there who were killed. And like I said, we did nothing different. I just got lucky.
My first sort of memory now as I look back on that night was I took my family, and the 4 of us went to this Greek restaurant, and we get home and I'm like halfway through the living room, and my son just has this startled look on his face, and he's like, "Dad, turn on the TV." And so I walked over and turned on the television. The blotter thing's going on the bottom, and there's police tape and lights, you know, Kirkwood City Hall shooting.
So he has shot a total of 7 people this evening, killing 5 of those people, and then Kirkwood police officers returned fire and did shoot and kill him.
And immediately, it's like, it all clicked into place. And I said, I need to get to the emergency room. And as pastors, we have the privilege often of showing up in people's lives at those horrible moments. But the energy of those is, I don't know, somehow you can contain that. But to go into a situation where there's been gun violence and the energy is overwhelming. The only way I got here was to have gone through mass shooting event in Kirkwood.
I prayed to God for a beautiful little girl, and that is exactly what I got. Everywhere I took that child, and this is the truth, strangers would come up to me. And I thought it was kind of bizarre at times because I'm like, you know, we go out and people were like, they just flock to your child like she's some celebrity. Who is she? And I'm like, this is just my daughter, special little baby. He said as they came down the street, they saw a group of people over there with t-shirts on from the funeral, and they made a U-turn. And he was instructed by the driver for all of them to get the guns out when the windows go down. But he never looked. He turned his head away as he pulled the trigger. And he could see other people shooting, but he himself would not look at the people he was shooting.
Shortly after 7 o'clock last night, and as you can see, there's still plenty of daylight out. Police believe the weapon of choice here, an AK-47, in what appears to be a drive-by shooting.
The paramedics are cutting, you know, the clothing, trying to resuscitate her. She's in cardiac arrest, fighting for her life. And the last person that she looks at is not her mother. I'm not there to hold her hand, to tell her I love her one last time. She has to be traumatized and leave this planet looking into strangers' eyes.
I was playing baseball with some of my friends. We didn't hear the bullet fire because we were playing baseball. We didn't know what was going on, but we heard a ton of sirens. So from my perspective that day, I come down the street and I see, you know, hundreds of cops. And we live in a safe neighborhood. This isn't something that we see every day, so we go to check it out. I got in my car and I started driving down here, and the traffic was parked all the way back here because they had the entire road shut down. So I parked my car right over here, and we walked up. And so this whole line of road was just lined with cars on both sides. And when I couldn't get through, I looked up and realized very quickly that my dad's car was here and that they were involved. So they let me through the police tape right up here, and I sat in this intersection right here for about a half an hour with no answer, no response. Nobody could tell me what was going on. Finally, a police officer came up to me and he says, 3 people that you just mentioned are involved. And if you want any answers, you need to go to the hospital and get your answers there.
Memorial Day weekend, 2005. My wife and I pulled up into the driveway at Steve's house, and the last words I'll ever hear her say to me was, "Timing is everything." Well, it turns out timing was everything, because if we would have been there 10 minutes earlier, 10 minutes later, we wouldn't have been there when the monster came up the driveway. It happened within 2 seconds. It was like that quick.
He turned directly to my dad, and he shot my dad square in the stomach. Neighbors said that he stood over my mom while she was on her knees, that he looked at her, she begged for her life, and he let her walk 10 feet before he shot and killed her by shooting her in the back.
And, you know, went through her heart. And, I mean, she hit the ground dead, and so they tell me. Maybe they told me that to make me feel better about it. You know, I don't know, because I never got to go over and hold her. I never got to say goodbye to her. And the last thing I'll ever hear her say is, "Timing is everything." At that point, my clothes were all blood-soaked red. And I just laid on my back and I looked up to the sky, and I can remember seeing it was a beautiful, clear day in Thousand Oaks, man.
I remember walking into the church. It's a big church, and there's a round desk, the Welcome Center, that kind of is the hub of everything. And almost the entire staff was there around the desk. And there was a little black and white TV screen that someone had found, and they were watching the news. And I stood there with them, and at some point that night, while we were still together, the phrase that comes to me is, you know, this changes everything.
that was my only child. So I had been a mother for so long that I'm not really sure where my footing is now. It's really difficult. And there are times where I will pick up the phone because it's like I forget almost that she's dead, and I'm dialing her number and I'm like, oh God, I forgot my daughter. I still am in a home that we once shared and don't hear the laughter. Just a bunch of memories that are, that just there. I can't make any more. I found this little card with a bouquet of flowers on a very rare occasion that I go to the cemetery, but I went to the cemetery, Bruce Shell's gravesite one day, and I saw these beautiful purple and yellow flowers, and I saw a card. And when I picked the card out of the flowers, I recognized the handwriting as my father's handwriting, and it just has her name on it, Brichelle. So I was like, that was odd that he left a card. Then when I opened it, it's a I'm sorry. And it says, Bree, I am so hurt that I was not there to protect you, but I hope that you are not without the thoughts of me. I really miss you, Papa. And then I realized at that moment that I'm not the only person that has guilt. We all feel like, we weren't there for Brichelle.
People say to me that, well, time heals everything. Time heals all. That's not what happens, okay? Time is a Band-Aid, and I wouldn't let the monster take away from my family anything more than he took away. So we were going to stand up, we were going to move on, we were going to do what we had to do. But time doesn't heal anything. I still have the same cuts, the same wounds. I mean, the bullet hole's still there. I'll never forget it. And I'll never forget the sound of those guns going off and how it broke up a peaceful afternoon. My kids' lives will never be normal for what they went through. Mine will never be normal again.
When you hear about that person on page 8 that has been shot, it's background noise. So many people look past that and don't hear it or don't feel it. But as a survivor of gun violence, you can't help but feel for the entire community and the entire web of people that are touched by that individual.
It's almost if you could chart it out, single person, handgun, bullet, death, the wave just gets huge really quickly. That energy just ripples through a whole community and touches so many lives. Because a shooting occurs in their community and that ripples through the community, that's the trigger, but that devastation is so much bigger. That's just the epicenter of it. And then it goes out, and what gets destroyed is love and hope and peace, but all that goodness. It's the goodness that gets destroyed. And it takes a while to put back together. And now, years later, my phone rings, and there's a shooting in Tucson, Arizona. And I realized that the invitation that I had been given in Kirkwood was to walk through that shadow. And that now I was being called to go help others accept that invitation to walk through this.
The first time that I was really just struck by the destruction was serving as an on-call chaplain in the trauma bay. You're right there when they come in. To see somebody's with a bullet hole in their head, or to see the doctors have to just right there, because they don't have time to get down to the OR right away, crack open their chests just to keep that heart pumping. It's just a horrible thing. And when you've seen that for 2 and 3 times during the night, it just had an impact on me. I had to step back from it and say, what in the world is going on? How can this happen time after time after time?
I've been doing this for about 6 years, and I would say over the years, the actual gun violence has gone down somewhat. However, the age of the victims seems to be getting younger and younger, which is very concerning to me. They look like babies. I mean, some of them come in here 14, 15 years old, and I sort of go into treatment mode, and I don't really think about it at the time. It's, you know, what life-threatening injuries does this person have, and I sort of go into autopilot and do what I have to do. But the after effects on me is actually something that we don't talk about much as, you know, trauma surgeons. But, you know, at the end of the day, you go home and think about, you know, what you just witnessed or what you just experienced, and you know, I think over time, you know, it has given me almost a very cynical view of our society. I mean, again, we're seeing victims younger and younger being injured, being shot over things that are more and more silly. And so it's, where are we going as a community, as a society, where it's just so easy to do that to one another?
Sharon. And so that was the pivotal point for me, being there real time and seeing a young person come in a gurney that way. And just to see how that whole neighborhood is there. And it is just an uproar of grief. And to see the damage that's done because this has happened, we know that in the morning, this child is not going to be a part of that community anymore.
Fighting soldier on the battlefield, church, I'm a heart fighting soldier on the battlefield. I'm a heart fighting soldier on the battlefield, trying to bring some soul to Jesus.
We are here tonight, yet for another homicide, another senseless homicide on one of our family members being tragically murdered. And I understand what the family's going through because my son was murdered too. And for those of y'all that don't know, my name is Kenny Barnes. And I guarantee you, I fight with every breath of my body to stop this insanity. For those y'all don't know me, I fight every day so we don't have to go through this. Before my son was murdered, I was living the American dream. 2-car garage, white picket fence, acre of land, 4-bedroom house. And then all that changed with one bullet. The young man that murdered my son, 17 years old, at least 3 murders in the course of a year, at least 3 cold-blooded murders in the course of a year, with no remorse. We're living in an age that we have some of, and luckily it's still a small percentage, but some of the most violent children ever in the history of the United States of America. We were in a school in Southeast Washington, and there must have been, 1,000 children in the auditorium. And I was speaking. And what I did was, I said, I want everybody in this auditorium who lost a family member or friend to come bounce and stand up. The whole auditorium stood up. There are 2 types of gun violence in America today. One type is like what happened in Arizona, or Fort Hood, or Columbine, or Virginia Tech. Well, then when that happens, all of a sudden, there is an issue, my God, about gun violence in America. But that's an outlier. That happens once every now and then. That doesn't happen every day. When the fact of the matter is, Americans are being murdered every day. 80 Americans are being killed every day by gun violence.
My name's Stefan, I'm 13 years old. Was I scared? That's not even a word for it. I was terrified. I mean, the gun was pointing at me and I didn't know which direction it was pointing, so I don't even remember looking back. I was just running. And I got like 20 yards away from them before they fired. And I just hit the ground. That was it. Hit the ground and I couldn't get back up. I don't think nobody should have to go through something like that. Not at my age that I would. Not at 12.
Well, being in a middle school, our kids are 11 through 15, 16 sometimes. And I think we forget, like, these are children. These are children that are being exposed to unbelievable things. We had another girl whose brother was shot up on a playground at the beginning of this school year. And then all the little kids that were in elementary school looked out the window and saw this happening on their playground. Probably over 100 witnessed that event. What does that do to you? Never mind the effects on the families and, you know, everybody else. I think the super exposure to witnessing violence and just being around it constantly for our kids is, we're not even close to knowing what it's doing to them yet.
My role model is Kevin Durant. I want to go to Texas, and then I want to go to Oklahoma City Thunder and wear number 35. Up the street, my sister got shot. The ambulance came, and like probably some weeks later, or maybe a month probably, she came to my house, and like they said she won't be able to talk. I just started running to the house. I seen her, started crying. I was scared. I thought I was never gonna see her again.
When you're a kid, your mother always tell you stay on the block. And that block right there is basically where you're supposed to be safe at. I was on my block when I got shot.
They have to be tough because they have another brother, sister, or friend that's gonna probably end up getting killed too. So they become survivors and they act in survival mode. So, you know, when that basic need of safety isn't there, you see all sorts of behaviors. So the kids are all over the map.
It's just like, it's so much violence on the streets, you just can't get away from it. I mean, you could be in school, in class, and violence can come to you. You don't even have to be doing nothing. You can be at home, violence can come to you.
We have to look at gun violence as not a legal problem, but a public health crisis. It's a public health issue, and we have to deal with it as a public health issue.
You don't see, when you come home from work, you don't see children outside playing. You're just enjoying life and becoming a part of the fabric of the neighborhood because they're inside. So you're even robbing a whole generation of the opportunity just to simply be children. You're changing the fabric of the neighborhood because now everybody is behind doors.
I'm Eric Fenton, and I work for the Metropolitan Police Department, Criminal Investigations Division. There's shootings going on every day. Like maybe last week, I think we had at least 4 shootings out of a 5-day work week for me. And they're any time of the day. We have them early in the morning, we have one at 8 o'clock. Kids are going to school, there's a shooting on the corner. We'll have one again in the evening. It goes on all day, every day. I've adapted to it, and I guess I've become numb to the fact of the stuff that goes on a regular basis. And you see some stuff that change your life, and it makes you, some days you want to do more, and some days you just don't want to be a part of it at all.
So what's the solution, you know? And they should be able to walk in their neighborhood and go from point A to point B without fear of their lives. And that's the other thing, like, you talk about gun violence and what does it do? How about not being able to walk through a neighborhood because you're afraid you're going to get shot? Like, how crazy is that?
Sometimes it's almost an expectation. Even the young people don't expect to go their whole lifetime without being shot. If this was a pandemic like the flu or some strange virus, the CDC would be on it to say, okay, what must we do as a society to rid ourselves of this menace, because it is taking away our natural resources, which are our children and even our parents.
Every day, Long Island's own news network.
He was shot and killed by Colin Ferguson on December 7th, 1993. 6 people were killed that night and more than a dozen were injured.
In that second, my life changed. I screamed for about 2 or 3 minutes as it got me to the hospital. And that was the beginning of a very, very long journey.
Thank you, and I thank both of you for the fight that we've been putting on, and I thank the police officers that are here. And I thank the victims for being here. It was 10 years ago that I was here as a citizen, like any of you. Because not only am I a congresswoman, I'm also a victim. Because my husband was shot and killed on the Long Island Railroad Massacre just about 11 years ago, in December. And my son, unfortunately, was shot also. And it was during that time, as my son was learning how to speak again, he asked me, how could this happen? And I said, I don't know.
And I made a decision that Kevin was alive. I had to be there for him, 100%. My husband had died. There was nothing I could do for him. I decided I needed to find out how. Why? Why did it happen to us? Why did it happen to a suburban community to go through all this pain?
We mourned my mother. My dad, fully healed. He had some amazing doctors. And when he healed, you know, we brought him home and he got better, and then we had the funerals. And when we pieced things together and we found these things out about Toby, all these things came out. Like, as soon as we saw that Steve had a restraining order against this man as a credible threat of violence, as soon as we saw that he had been dishonorably discharged from the military, as soon as we saw that he had all these things stacked up against him, and pretty much anybody you talk to would say that, oh yeah, that guy's dangerous. As soon as we realized all this stuff, and he still owned 3 guns and a handful of extended magazines and, you know, essentially an arsenal, we realized we needed to do something, because we can't let this just happen. Because the community I live in just accepts it as an urban problem. It's an issue that we never thought would touch us. It's an issue that we thought was a problem that was, you know, 45 minutes away in Los Angeles, but we didn't accept that it happens in Thousand Oaks because we live in the safest city in America. But you know what? It happened. And we're living in a state of apathy, whether you're living in the inner city or you're living in the suburbs where I'm at, where we need to accept that there is no right place and right time for gun violence to take place.
And I wear her bracelet every day. Her dad had it made in Trinidad one summer she went, so I wear her bracelet, and I wear it on my left arm because she was left-handed. So I feel like I always have Brichelle with me. It just says Bree J. When she was younger, it was one that said Brichelle, but he would constantly take the gold and have it melted and make bigger and bigger ones. So this was the last one made.
The trial has started, and that's really draining, really, really emotionally draining. Sitting in the courtroom every day, from morning to evening. One of the guys, he took a plea, and he's pretty much told the story from beginning to end. And, you know, he specifically addressed me in the court. He was so hurt that he hurt a little girl. Then he says, you know, Miss Jeffries, I've been wanting to tell you for a long time. I'm so sorry, you know, is he crying? And I just got up and walked out of the courtroom. I don't want to hear you're sorry.
I can't make Brichelle safe because she's dead. But I can certainly try to make other people's children, myself and the rest of the community and society safe by making sure that all these
illegal guns are not falling into violent people's hands. We have a right to be safe. And we have a right to live. And I just can't accept that. I'm not going to accept that. Not as a mother. Not as a citizen of the United States. I'm not accepting it.
Once again, we're back right here on WPFW 89.3 FM, Washington, D.C. We have with us Reverend Jim Atwood, and we're talking about issues of gun violence, and we're going from a whole different variety of ways to address this issue.
Part of the action that I've been involved in is protesting and carrying signs in front of one of the top 10 major dealers of illegal guns in this country.
This is one of the top gun stores in the country whose guns have shown up at crime scenes. Over an 18-year period, 2,500 guns were found at crime scenes.
Felt and expressed this day as we gather here. We ask further that you would melt the heart of Mr. Del Rio.
We are organizing people to protest these sales, and we stand out in front of the gun store, ask passersby to honk their horns in support, and it's increasingly louder there. Practically every week we go.
Amen.
I think it's good that we're out here. People are quiet about a lot of things, but their silence won't protect them. So we have to be noisy sometimes. This is the American way. And I think it makes an impact if we're out here doing something. So that's why I'm here.
They didn't take out the bullets that had entered because they had all broken up into small pieces. So still to this day, almost 5 years later, I still have 3 bullets in my body and a metal rod in my leg that will be with me for the rest of my life. You know, my father was getting involved in these issues and started talking about, you know, some of the issues with laws, and I think I was like many Americans who thought that, you know, we did everything we could to keep dangerous people from getting their hands on a gun. And so it was my father was telling me these things, and I was like, wow, you know, like, really? No background checks for everybody? I thought everybody had to take one. And I was thinking about this, and I was like, oh, you know, people really need to know about that. Like, that's shocking. At the end of the day, I talked to my dad. I said, Dad, look, I want to get involved in this, and I want to do it 100%.
We didn't have a massacre at Virginia Tech because there was a very disturbed student who wanted to take revenge on his classmates. We had a massacre at Virginia Tech because a very disturbed student had access to a gun. How in the world did these kids get these guns? And what can we do to prevent them from getting the guns?
We tend to see the beads on the necklace, one tragedy at a time, and we don't see the string that connects them together. There are ways in which we could interrupt the chain of events that leads to shootings. After residency, I worked for a while in emergency medicine and saw gun violence along with everything else. And my career feels like over and over again, I'm just rushing into the water and grabbing drowning people and bringing them back out. And I'm so busy doing that that I have no time at all to look upstream and figure out who the hell is throwing them all in. 30,000 people are killed by firearms every year in this country alone. There are today in the United States no more than half a dozen people working on firearm violence from a research perspective as their main area of emphasis. To my knowledge, I am the only practicing physician doing it. I'm not saying that to brag. That's a terrible problem.
My father was a police officer for 28 years and somebody I admired a lot. And he said, when you're looking at crime, just remember it's about the money. And if you follow the trail of the money, you'll find out where the bad guys are. One of the first studies, and it's been repeated afterwards, and we come up with the same results, is that of all the federal firearms dealers in the United States, 86% have never had a crime gun traced back to their store. Yet, less than 1% of all federally licensed firearms dealers contribute to over 60% of all the crime guns that law enforcement recovers from criminals. All we do right now is wait for something to happen and then go back and investigate it. We follow the trail of blood when we could prevent this from occurring.
There's always a loophole. There's always someone to get the guns to us because it's a product, it's supply and demand. There'll be a guy that'll come in the neighborhood, he'll be in a car, or he'll come up with a gun, like, hey, he's got him here, I got him, and they're going for it at $250, they're going for $300, and they'll come up and get them. They'll buy the guns, and next thing you know, the whole neighborhood is stocked with guns.
There's no such thing as the street. The street is a number of well-defined marketing channels. Straw purchases where people go to dealers and buy for somebody else, unregulated sales at gun shows and flea markets, and a smaller amount of stolen weapons. That's what makes up the street. If we wanted to do something about that, we would regulate dealers, we'd have better background checks, and we'd lock our guns. There would be no street after that.
It's starting to be hard to get a gun in some areas. If you go to another section of the city, they're everywhere. And I think we could stop it if we wanted to stop it. It would just take a whole lot of money and a whole lot more people that care.
You know, looking back on it, I'm really glad I got to be there that weekend to see her before April 16th. And it was so cool to see her blossoming into this like amazing young woman. And she was doing it at a school that I loved. And I just kept taking any opportunity I had to speak about April 16th and what happened, because after going through it and seeing how much pain it caused my family, it was like, I never want to see that again. Virginia Tech was a preventative tragedy. Like, we could have prevented that if we had certain laws in place. Cho fell through so many cracks. There were so many times he could have been stopped, and we didn't do that. We're arming the very people we're trying to protect ourselves from, and that doesn't make any sense to me.
There are about 33 states where you can buy a gun without a background check. So we know that a huge amount of criminal activity comes from that market.
We're talking about 40% of all firearms transactions in the United States go through this loophole. That's not a loophole. There was a time when I actually looked up what a loophole was, because why do we say that? Did it have something to do with rope or whatnot? A loophole is a small aperture in a fortified wall that you can shoot an arrow through originally, or more recently shoot a firearm through. But we're talking about gaps in regulation that you can drive a truck through. We're not talking about loopholes. We're talking about huge, deliberately constructed and expensively maintained gaps in a sane regulatory scheme that make it as easy as it can possibly be for criminals and other prohibited parties to purchase firearms in quantity with nobody knowing.
He said it was this mix of gunshots and club.
Police say they were dispatched after an anonymous 911 call claiming someone had a gun.
It appeared to come from the rooftop in the center of Dallas.
A new video emerging this morning of another police shooting last night in Minnesota.
We as a society, there's never been anybody alive that has witnessed more trauma than us, because of how much trauma we've imbibed since when we were children. One of the first things you see at a shooting scene, especially one that's unfolding, is media. And that gets transmitted to social media. And we start watching. Within 15 minutes, we have viral explosion of this into the consciousness of a nation and beyond. That is what you're calling a ripple effect, what I'm calling a contagion. The action of one person has infected hundreds of millions. And that happening day in and day out. How is media, gun violence and other forms of violence, how's that turning into symptoms for individuals and our culture? What's that do to a community, a city, a country, a state? Is it makes people more and more and more afraid. We are collectively perceiving a more dangerous world. Secondary trauma produces a perceived threat where there is no danger. A constant diet of imbibing trauma, fear-mongering, and intense increasing of anxiety and increasing of perceived threat. And you can't do that without it impacting. It's gradual and cumulative. And what it produces is a state of chronic reactivity and symptom generation. And people who are trauma saturated, they can't hear anymore. They can't listen. They become polarized. It's us and them. Which means that it needs to be addressed deliberately. It is an incremental, bipartisan, multiracial, all socioeconomic status problem. It pervades everybody. And the solution is in unity. Not unanimity, unity. Not everybody being the same. Everybody is welcome to their differences, but an amicable and deliberate process of starting to make things better with dialogue first, so that we can hear each other's sides of the fence without it producing so much polarization that we can't move it forward. You can't move it forward when you stay in polarization. It's stuck. It's in stasis.
I do not want to disarm America. You know, if you want to use your Second Amendment constitutional right to own a weapon, I just want to make sure that the people who own those weapons and use those weapons are doing so responsibly. And that we know that those people are of sane mind that are going to use those weapons in a responsible manner.
We're not saying take away guns. And we're not saying let's get rid of the Second Amendment. We're saying let's just enforce the laws that we have. We're only doing things to protect all Americans, gun owners and non-gun owners alike.
And so I think that we live in a country where it's clear that people will be able to own guns for self-defense in their home. But at the same time, I think we also need to say that we can keep guns away from criminals.
There's a lot of middle ground to be had.
There's a lot of middle ground that hasn't been met and that needs to be met.
And when you have conversations with people who even think that they're the most stringent of gun right advocates, you'll find that these people agree with you.
Going around to each university, we got to see the other side and they got to see us, and we had open debates. And then when we were at Tech, we actually had a student-to-student conversation, students on their side, students on our side, and we came to like certain compromises and agreements. It was kind of an amazing thing, and it hadn't happened before. At least I had never seen it happen before. But that needs to happen on a national level, where gun owners and non-gun owners alike can find the common ground and say, okay, you're not going to take our guns away from us. And yeah, we want to keep guns away from the dangerous people, so let's work together on that.
Why are you excluding the possibility that a single gun in that class may have saved lives?
You don't know because it may not have.
You don't know that anything you're talking about would have done any good.
We're talking about what we could have done to prevent it.
Wait a minute, listen.
Without carrying
We all have to be in this together, and it can't be just the loudest voices. We don't need extremes. We need to have a conversation. How do we do it? You can't tell me we can't come and work together on solutions to reduce gun violence. There has to be a solution because it's costing this country too much in its people. It's costing this country too much in money. And it's costing the citizens too much pain.
As a parent, as a mother, I just feel like I'm left with a lot of guilt. You may have stolen my daughter's life, but the memories and the love that is etched in my heart that she gave me, that can't be erased either. So they may have taken her physically, but they will never be able to take all the memories that she left with me and all the love. And her love was her self-worth. But my thing is, as long as I have breath in my lungs, wherever I'm needed to be, to speak, to advocate, to try to make anybody listen and save innocent lives, then that is what I will do.
Again, I thank you all for coming this evening. The most recent version of this film, I think, was from 2017, but it was initially produced a few years prior to that. And I'm sure some of the statistics are out of date, and the figures are even higher. And clearly, you know, there's an issue in this country. I think one of the questions that stood out to me, the physician said, you know, how did we get to this place as a society? I think we all have questions. We have theological questions. We have practical questions. So I want to introduce our panel this evening. I'll start at this end. We have Dr. Bob Kennard. He is the Chief of Pediatric Surgery at Cottage Hospital and can speak from a physician perspective, which I'll be interested to hear some comments related to the physicians in the film as well. And then we have Fran Wegenek, who is the Assistant Superintendent for Santa Barbara Unified School District. And then we have the Reverend Dr. Kate Wiebe, who is the founder for the Institute of Collective Trauma and Growth. She is also a first responder for the Presbyterian Disaster Assistance and has been on the scene of many of these shootings in the aftermath. And did I see you in the film, Kate? Okay, I thought I saw you. Yes, okay, thank you for being here. And then we have Suzanne Grimacy, who is the Chief of Strategy and Community Engagement for the Santa Barbara Department of Behavioral Wellness. So I've asked each of them just to respond to the film for a few moments each, and then we will open up the floor to questions from the floor here, and then also coming in from the live stream. Would you like to start down? Should we start at this end? How about if we start with Suzanne and we'll just work our way down the table? Does that sound okay?
Sounds good.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to join this evening. I watched the film from home in preparation for being here, and it made me feel angry. And I watched it again sitting here, and I still feel angry. We have recently experienced a compilation of mass shootings, including 3 just over this last weekend. Even if these are not occurring right now in our immediate community, we're experiencing the vicarious trauma from these events, very much like secondhand smoke. The trauma of events like mass shootings or any mass casualty or high-stress event leaves a tremendous impact on every individual and in our community as a whole. Just as we listened to in the film, the trauma permeates every corner of our community, from families, friends of victims, survivors, parents, children, congregations, first responders, law enforcement, mental health, and even more. Even if not directly impacted, violent trauma takes away a sense of safety that most people take for granted in their lives and the lives of those that they care about. And it creates a significant sense of vulnerability. As humans, we want to feel a sense of control in our lives. The sense of control tells us what to expect, and it creates comfort. When this is ripped away without warning, it leaves people not only with feelings of vulnerability, but also with sadness, irritability, frustration, and even anger. It is so important to recognize the impact of the news and what it has on each of us. It's normal for our minds to experience a feeling of feeling distracted. Other normal reactions may include shock, sadness, numbness, fear, anger, disillusionment, grief. In addition to having trouble sleeping, it's not uncommon to have trouble concentrating, eating, or remembering simple tasks. I share this because I feel fairly certain many of us are sitting here and may be experiencing these feelings. We also each individually know what we need to feel better for our own self-care. To share some tips, talk about it. Talk about your reactions, your feelings in response to what we're seeing pop up so frequently now on the news. There's a lot of things we can't control within this, but look for the things that you can control. That helps to give us a sense of balance. Limit media exposure. Find a media source that's trustworthy and look at it a couple times a day, but try and avoid the constant scrolling and looking. Also important is to honor your feelings. Remember that it's very common to have this range of feelings and emotions. Many of you may be feeling simply exhausted despite feeling like you're getting a good night's sleep, and that's because of the emotional exhaustion that comes with this. So honor those feelings. Take really good care of yourselves, especially now as we're going through this chapter in life where we're seeing this happen so frequently. Engage in healthy behaviors, eating well, keeping yourself hydrated, getting outside and moving your body, and protecting your sleep. Help other people that might need the help more. Volunteer, find ways to be productive. Those are other ways that give us a sense of control and can help us in our healing. If any of you here tonight have recently lost someone, those feelings of grief can very much be triggered and kicked up in an event like this that may be totally unrelated. So to be aware and to honor the feelings that go with that. And what I would probably say is most important is to stay connected to each other. I've had the opportunity to work with many survivors and family members after multiple mass casualty events, several that involved gun violence. Staying connected is critical. And in closing, in my comments, I think many of us are probably sitting here asking what the answer is. What can we do about this? And I don't have an answer for that myself. But what I can say, I would implore all of us to avoid a sense of complacency, a sense of starting to feel like this is normal, what we're seeing. It's not okay and it's not normal for people to be shot and killed in their place of worship, at school, at a graduation, or at any kind of a social gathering. It's not normal, and it's not okay for children, young adults, any age adult, to feel worried that that might happen when they go to worship, when they go to school, when they go to an event. So I thank you all for caring as much as you do and for joining here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. I would underscore all of that. And the only thing I would add maybe to our introduction is that Suzanne and Fran and I were all founding members of the community wellness team here in Santa Barbara, and so we can speak to that as well. It's a group of behavioral health-minded agencies that all gathered together several years ago following the Thomas Fire, and have ever since then been working together to collaborate and focus on a wide range of incidents that have gone on in our community. I would say that it's always interesting for me watching this film because, as Anne said, there's been a few versions of this film, and one of the first versions had some focus on a shooting that happened at a church that my husband and I were a part of in Illinois. And at the time, I was in a PhD program and was studying pastoral theology, personality, and culture, and I was focused particularly on trauma in groups and in congregations and faith communities. And then we experienced a shooting on church grounds, and it was heart-wrenching. And that's what introduced me to Presbyterian disaster assistance, as well as the VOAD community, volunteer organizations active in disaster, and the many faith-based and community-based organizations that gather together to respond to both natural and human-caused disasters. I went to discern whether I was going to be a part of this group in 2009 or 10, and I happened to discern with Reverend Hollian, who is featured in the film, and Suzanne Malloy, who's here in town as well. We all discerned together, and the first shooting that I responded to was Tucson with Reverend Hollian. And I went on to respond to the shooting in Aurora and Newtown and many other shootings since then, including those in our own backyard. And I'm sure many of us felt probably a lot of things in response to the movie talking about Thousand Oaks and what we know has unfolded there since then, including, some people don't know this, but over 800 survivors of the Las Vegas shooting were from Thousand Oaks. So Thousand Oaks was reeling from that shooting before the Borderline shooting happened, and we were, my husband and I were intimately impacted by the Borderline shooting, as one of our next door neighbors was there that night, and then of course it impacted this church community, and my husband did one of the funerals for that event. So I would say I'm happy to answer questions, especially related to the impacts, the emotional impacts, as Suzanne spoke to, and how the ripple effects of those kinds of impacts.
Yeah, it's really interesting to work in schools, and I'm about ready to end my career in public education in about 15 days, 15 work days. And thank you. And as I was watching the film, and just now I was thinking about how the impact of gun violence has changed public education since my career began in the 1990s. I happened to be home with a kidney infection when Columbine occurred, and so I watched it. I was a teacher at that time, and I watched it unfold, and it was mind-blowing to think that something like that could happen in a school. And as I reflect now, all these years later, for the last 7 years, I have been the Assistant Superintendent of Student Services, and school safety is one of my main responsibilities. And what we've been through just in our own community in those 7 years, not in terms of gun violence per se, but threat of gun violence, and we have that, and we continue to have that on a regular basis, and how much more it is just a part of what we do as compared to 25, 30 years ago. So in terms of, when I think about what should you all know about gun violence in schools, I get often asked, okay, what can we do to guarantee that we won't have a school shooting in our district? And I say there are no guarantees. In our society today, we have no guarantees. The only way I think we could get close to having a guarantee is to turn our schools physically into prisons, to harden them, to put up 30-foot fences and buzz everyone in and out, and use weapon detection systems. And I don't say that lightly. I feel the tension that causes my body when I say that, but there are things we can do. And I don't think hardening schools is the answer. No one wants their children, their grandchildren, their neighbors in schools that look like a prison. Rather, what we've worked on doing is to identify students who are in pain, former students who are in pain before. And so threat assessments are a big part of what we do, so I can certainly speak to that tonight. But also, it's really about the climate of the school and creating spaces where everyone feels like they belong. And not just students, but also staff, family members, members of the community. So creating a sense of belonging. We hear a lot about bullying. And so that is important to address. And it's something that is very layered with issues of race and economic status, gender, sexuality. All these things get tied up. And so it's a societal issue, clearly. And then I would say, finally, it's really about mental wellness, and our schools have become the holders of a lot of mental health services, not just here in Santa Barbara, but nationwide. And so in the film, they talked about the epidemic of gun violence. We have the epidemic of gun violence. We have the epidemic of child and youth mental illness. And that is something that we need to definitely address more of. So really thankful to be here tonight and appreciate you all being here.
Thank you. Thank you. There's not much left to say, but I'll say something since I'm here. I was struck by the movie that there was much talk about the mass shootings, which has been variously defined. Generally, it's when 4 or more people are shot. And so there's a lot of talk about that, and certainly there are a lot of mass shootings. There's roughly, since the start of this year, it's about 2 a day. Today, June 5th, it was Chattanooga, Mesa, Arizona, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and Saginaw, Michigan, among the 36 incidents on a Sunday. But it's not the public mass shootings that get the news, but it's the domestic, the private mass shootings. It's the daily monotony, and having worked in trauma for adult trauma, now pediatric trauma, for over 20 years. It's just this numbing monotony of the victims and we keep showing up to take care of them. But so the film made you angry. I've been angry, and I stay angry, and that's how I deal with it. That I'm angry that every holiday is marked by a dead child. And so I carry the children with me, and I think about them, and I talk about them. I think that's the main thing I can do, is talk about it. Full disclosure, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. I'm not a politician. There's not much I can do except show up and talk. And I approach this not as a political thing. I don't think this is political. I think it's a public health issue. And so when I give talks about gun violence, I just present the information. No one in all these years has ever come up to me and said, well, by gosh, I'm glad that my child died for the Second Amendment. No, every person, regardless whether it's their gun or someone else's gun, has said if there was anything they could do to undo what had happened. But it's, the walk through the ER to the consultation room where the chaplain or social workers gathered the family, and thank you for doing that, really, it's the same talk. Introduce myself, and we have done everything we can for your son, daughter, mother, brother, fill in the blank. But the injuries were too catastrophic, and they're dead. And then just sit with them while everything explodes. So, yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that so much. I'll open the floor for any questions, comments. I can share some stories as well, but I want to first open it up to anyone who has questions, comments. Dave, do you want to come forward, or I can bring the mic? How about I bring the microphone to you?
It surprised me on those protesters that had the signs that it said, "Stop the illegal guns." It seems to me the issue is the legal guns.
Does anyone want to take that, respond to that in any way?
I think it's the illegal guns, the legal guns that become illegal guns. And selling guns without background checks. There are a lot of laws in place. There's a lot of laws that need to be in place, certainly. But I thought that's what they were targeting.
What struck me this week is someone said, you have to have a license to go fishing. And it's easier to buy a gun than to buy Sudafed at the drugstore. And, these things are just confounding to me. So yes, I identify with anger.
One of the speakers in the film had a comment that kind of jumped out at me. We don't know yet what effect this is having on the children. And since the film's a little bit dated and you all deal with this all the time, are there any studies that are going on now or have been completed that is are trying to address what has become sort of a normalcy. I know you say don't accept it as normal, but the kinds of things that kids have to listen to every day, kind of security measures they have to go through every day. Is anybody doing studies on the effect this is having on youngsters?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of studies, and it's also hard to isolate what exactly is affecting kids. So there's, for sure, there's the social media and things like that, but there's also, you know, kids today are having a lot of lockdown drills and things like that, and to what extent does that raise anxiety or help soothe? You know, it depends on the child, and so it's difficult to isolate what exactly is the source of anxiety or depression or those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think there's, it resonated with me talking about collective trauma in our society. And when I say the changes that I've seen in 30 years, anything I say right now is anecdotal. It's my own my collection of research through observation, not formal research, but people are only as safe as they feel. And so we have to do the drills, because without doing the drills, because of the prevalence of mass shootings and what they showed in the movie, the constant visual reminder, we have to do drills so that people will feel safe. However, practicing the drills causes anxiety in some. And so we have 4-year-olds in transitional kindergarten who are doing lockdown drills. Now, we don't call them lockdown drills. We say if there's a person on, a man on campus who shouldn't be there, here's what we're going to do, so that you feel safe. And then developmentally, that changes. But we do a drill a month in Santa Barbara Unified. And I'll tell you what, I remind everyone I work with, the administrators, it is highly more likely that you are going to have a mountain lion or a bear. Actually, skunks are the most common wild animal to come onto campus, that you'll have to do some sort of lockout. And so I remind them, because they get agitated, but it's like, we're doing these drills because we need to. But we do a whole drill that can be for anything in general, like we have a dysregulated student who's upset out in the main hallway. We don't want anyone coming out. We have lockouts for things like the wild animals. We have lockdowns, which is what we're talking about with violent intruders. And in the lockdown, it's lock the doors, turn out the lights, get out of sight, and hide and stay down. And in our community, we have had, it's not uncommon to have not just drills, but actual lockdowns that need to occur. I've been in a lockdown when there was someone on campus with a gun who had committed a burglary and ran onto the campus of La Colina Junior High School when I was a counselor there. And so these things do happen, they are real. And then of course we have an evacuation drill. Everyone thinks about fire drills. You know that no one has died in a fire in a school in the United States since 1958, but we still do fire drills. But we don't do those as often as we used to. So anyway, just to kind of run you through the types of drills that students experience from age 4 to 18.
The research is an interesting question. That's sorry. There's a large field of pediatrics now kind of dedicated to this area called adverse childhood events, ACEs. and started up in Oakland, and it's interesting because what they're found is that children who are exposed to this long list of adverse events when they're young, of which firearm violence is one, actually are more likely to develop diabetes, hypertension, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, real medical problems later in life that they are related, or they're traced back to this childhood trauma. There's also this concept of the child, the trauma of a community and inherited trauma, that there's genetic changes that are then passed down. And so they're looking at generations of African Americans who have had hundreds of years of trauma and finding that, yeah, there are actual real changes there, and that's something. I think the reason that the UC Davis ER physician was highlighted in the film is for many years he was the only one doing research. And when he says he's the only physician, he is. And UC Davis has taken it upon themselves to create this and study it. It's in 1996, Representative Dickey from South Carolina inserted a little amendment to a bill that prevented any federal funds being used for research on gun violence. So of all the millions of dollars that the NIH gives out for research for every facet of our lives, there's nothing that's allowed for gun violence. And so unless private individuals are going to say, hey, I want to put my money here, it doesn't happen. Big change is Michael Bloomberg, when he started Everytown for Gun Violence, against gun violence. He was able to infuse millions of dollars into high quality research. So we have some studies that were done pre-1996 that were good, and now we're starting to have more robust research in this area.
Thank you. I was especially wondering about that, Bob, so thank you. One moment, Jen. My phone just went. I want to just say I've been notified that Anthony Rodriguez from the Santa Barbara Response Network is online, and so he's thanking us for doing this, commending the panel, and especially saying that Fran has done a wonderfully amazing job with the students. So just wanted to put that in there.
I know our time is running short, so I just want to ask you a personal question, each of you, if you reflect on it, because I appreciated that your responses, as you said, were anger. I'm angry, and if I assume that you are each dealing with this more regularly than most people are. You're seeing the effects of it, and you're reading the research, and you're having it every day when you go into work, and one of the things that was striking to me, one comment that was really striking to me, is the comment in the film that we're all sort of traumatized by this and we can't hear anymore, right? We can't think. So while it seems to me at one level, there are some very clear, simple solutions that would reduce gun violence legislatively, and yet we can't get there because we can't hear anymore. And we all kind of feel like we're up to here and we're all frozen. So my question to you personally is, you having to deal with this so often, how do you get out of that and step back a bit? Or do you, so that you can take a breath and come back to it with some equanimity and clarity? Is it possible?
I can start with the response to that. It's a really good question. I've seen so much in survivors of traumatic events, that feeling of feeling numb or just kind of paralyzed. And I see it from a perspective that I think as humans, we're naturally wired to be resilient, and our brains do a really good job, brains and bodies, of keeping us safe from harm. So both physical harm as well as psychological harm. And if there's too much that our body and our brain's not quite ready to tackle or emotionally absorb, oftentimes you'll see that numb feeling. And I've heard people say in groups, gosh, I see people crying or feeling upset and I'm not feeling anything and I feel kind of guilty. And I try and help with giving that explanation. But I share it also in a response to what you're asking, Jen, because I'm aware of that. For me personally, I try really, really hard to practice what I share as far as self-care. And it's not always easy at all. But I try and be very mindful of working in the things, of protecting my sleep at a time when I know I'm going through an even more difficult time because of events. Trying to get outside and move and walk and talk to people about it, because many times it feels so much easier to just kind of hunker down and close in, and I know that that's not the right thing. So what I find is by practicing those self-care, by talking, doing those things, it allows my brain, it allows our brains as humans to feel safe, and then allows those feelings to then come out. And it keeps us from feeling numbed. It keeps us from feeling paralyzed. So that's what I do.
Yeah, similarly, I was trained to think of it kind of like being an athlete, and I am not an athlete, and so it's not a metaphor that I came to easily, but thinking about, we often say it's, especially in the aftermath of these kinds of events, that it's a marathon and not a sprint, and part of what's helpful with that metaphor is reminding ourselves that no one these days runs a marathon without stopping at the stations for the water and the nutrients, and you're not going to get through that event. And anyone who really trains for those events is very mindful, as Suzanne said, of what it takes to get through that. And so very similarly, having practices that I know nourish me and are and kind of buoy my spirits in the midst of long-term responses is how to make it through and have, good things on the other side of it.
Yes, I was angry as well, and I was telling Kate and Suzanne that I became depressed after the Uvalde massacre for many reasons, and for me, a lot of it is about isn't something schools should have to. There's so much weight is on schools but how do I take care of myself? I think for me it was tagging that emotion that I was having most recently. So just using that as an example, it's being able to identify my emotions. I am great in a crisis. But what that means is I have to take care of myself. So similar to what's been said, sleep is super important, talking to people, getting mad, allowing myself to feel the things I'm feeling. And then being in the solution and knowing what I have an influence over and what I don't. And so, I would say it would be those. I mean, the solution part's important, but I'm not a constitutional lawyer or a politician either, and so that's where I think a lot of the frustration comes. Yeah, that's a great question.
I use it to fuel my anger. It's relentless, and I learned early in my training that stopping to consider one individual trauma prevented me from moving on to the next trauma that was just coming in. So there isn't. So it's either paralysis, which isn't really an option. Forgetting it, just being numb to it, which a lot of people do. Yeah, certainly good coping mechanism. It works. Or remembering them, honoring the kids who have died, and spending time with the families, so that we're to make it that much more real. And
speaking of trauma,
Yeah.
Totally derailed there. Yeah.
What it means to live in Santa Barbara.
Well, thank you for that question, Jen. I think that was really the impetus for me wanting to bring us together, was that same just feeling really helpless and depressed after this recent Uvalde massacre, being a pastor and a parent, feeling the enormity of it. And I have a daughter who works in a school, and I just am so frustrated that she deals with this and that I worry about her, and just as a pastor, wanting to bring us together so that we could do some of that, talk with one another, share our feelings, share our experiences, share our grief and our sorrow. Again, I don't think any of us have one answer to this huge issue, but I think we can continue to speak out and speak up for those whose lives have been lost, for those who we grieve, and to contact people in Washington. I know this weekend there's going to be a big march on Washington this Saturday, and there's some local marches as well. So we all respond in different ways, and I would just encourage you to use your voice and use whatever platform or power that you have to affect whatever change we can. So I do want to respect our time. So I'm a pastor, and we're in a church, and I feel compelled to close us in prayer. So I will do so. And if you would want to join me in prayer, let's pray. Lord of all creation, we know that you love each one of your children deeply, and you abide with all of your creation. And we know that this violence grieves your heart as it grieves ours. And so we pray, Lord, that we would repent of our penchant for violence, that we would grieve for those who are victims of violence all over the world, and that we would be moved to action in whatever ways you call us. I thank you for the panelists. I thank you for those who produced this film. And I thank you for each one who is gathered here this evening in our sanctuary and online. And we thank you for your promise to be with us always. Amen. Well, again, thank you, and thanks to each one of you. I appreciate your time and your expertise so very much, and thank you all for coming. And again, there are some handouts on the way out the door if you'd like to avail yourself of those. Yeah, let's thank the panelists.
Thank you for pulling this together.
Well, thank you all. Yeah, thank you. Maybe we can do a follow-up. I showed this at another church that I served. I had